They didn't shout at me at first. That's the part people don't expect. No raised voices, no scene, no drama. Just a quiet smile, a polite tone, and one sentence that landed heavier than a slap. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong section." That's how it started. Me standing in the aisle of a first-class cabin holding my boarding pass, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest. You know the feeling. That moment when you already know where this is going even before it gets there. Yeah. That happened. I had boarded like everyone else. No entourage, no spotlight. Just a carry-on, a navy jacket and a seat assignment that said 2A. I remember double-checking it before I stepped onto the plane, not because I was unsure, but because experience teaches you to be careful when you look like me in places people think you don't belong. The cabin smelled like leather and coffee, that clean, expensive quiet that first class always has. People settling in headphones on minds already somewhere else. And there I was, mid-aisle with a flight attendant smiling too hard and a man across the row watching me like I'd wandered into his living room uninvited. She glanced at my ticket, barely a glance really, then handed it back without looking me in the eye. "This area is reserved," she said. Calm, practiced, as if she'd said it 100 times before. I told her it was my seat. She tilted her head the way people do when they're about to explain something they think you won't understand. "Let's not make this difficult." That sentence, "let's not make this difficult." I felt the heat rise, but I stayed still. I always do. Growing up, my father drilled it into me. Stay calm, speak slow, don't give them a reason. I grew up learning how to survive rooms before I learned how to own them. Another attendant stepped in, taller, louder. He didn't bother hiding the edge in his voice. "Sir, we need you to move to economy. This seat's been reassigned." Behind him, a man in a crisp polo leaned back smirking like he was enjoying a show he'd paid for. Later, I'd find out he had. Cash does funny things to people's confidence. I asked to see the reassignment. The attendant smiled again. Internal policy. That's when I noticed a woman a few rows back lifting her phone, her hand shaking. Her husband leaned into the aisle saying, "We all boarded together. Why is he the only one being moved?" That's when the cabin shifted. Not loud, not yet, but aware. Inside, my mind drifted the way it always does in moments like this. To being 19, standing in a jewelry store with my paycheck folded in my pocket, being told I might be more comfortable somewhere else. To my first corporate job, mistaken for catering. To the meeting where someone asked if I was lost while I was literally leading the presentation. You stack enough moments like that, they stop surprising you. They just hurt in a quieter way. I sat down anyway. Not because I believed them, but because I wanted them to show their hand. And they did. A printed form appeared. Fresh ink, wrong font, sloppy. Anyone who'd ever built something real could smell the lie on it. They threatened security. They announced a delay. They framed it like I was the problem. And that's when something snapped, not loudly, not violently, but completely. I pulled out my phone and made one call. Log everything I said, audio too. The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. They never do. The man who had paid for my seat laughed under his breath. "You people always make it about something," he muttered. That's when the woman with the phone stood up. "No," she said, voice cracking but strong. "You made it about something when you decided he didn't belong." A young attendant, barely old enough to hide her fear, whispered that she'd checked my ticket herself. She was shut down fast, told to stay in her lane. But she didn't move. Instead, she slipped her phone into her pocket, recording. I saw it happen. I nodded. That nod mattered more than she knew. When the taller attendant reached for my arm, the cabin exploded. People stood. Bodies moved. A human wall formed without anyone planning it. Voices overlapped. "Don't touch him. That's assault. Call the captain." The power dynamic flipped so fast you could feel it in the air. I stood up then, slowly, calmly. Not because I was angry, but because I was done shrinking. I spoke clearly. I named everything they'd done. The bribe, the fake paperwork, the threats. I said it was all recorded. I said there would be consequences. They laughed. A nervous laugh. The kind people make when they think authority will save them. "Who do you think you are?" one of them asked. I told them my name. I told them what I built. I told them who owned the airline. Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses on your ears. The man who'd been smirking went pale. The attendants froze like they'd stepped off a cliff and only just realized there was no ground. I made another call. This time I didn't lower my voice. Decisions were made. Approved. Immediate. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. Power doesn't sound the way movies teach you it does. Sometimes it sounds like a man calmly ending a conversation. The young attendant was promoted before we even pushed back from the gate. Her hands shook when I told her. She cried. The cabin applauded, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt right. Later, after the replacements boarded and the plane finally took off, I sat by the window and let myself breathe. 10 minutes, that's all it took. 10 minutes to remind a room full of strangers that silence is a choice, and so is speaking up. Weeks later, the story went everywhere. People argued. Some said I overreacted. Some said I was only believed because of my title. They weren't wrong. And that's the uncomfortable truth. If I hadn't been who I was, that flight would have ended very differently. That's why this isn't a victory story. It's a question. What happens to the people who don't get the reveal, who don't own the building, the plane, the system judging them? I still fly. I still sit in first class sometimes. And every now and then I catch someone watching me wondering. I don't mind anymore, because now I know something they don't. Belonging isn't granted. It's claimed. So let me ask you this. If you'd been on that flight, what would you have done? Would you have looked away? Would you have filmed? Would you have stood up and risked being uncomfortable for someone else's dignity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue. Disagree. Tell your story. Because the only thing that guarantees nothing changes is pretending you didn't see it.